Hi everyone, welcome to our book launch this evening. My name's Jasmine, I'm from Carcanet Press, and I am very happy to welcome you to this launch. We are launching a memoir from Fred Dagar, which I have here, Year of Plagues, a memoir of 2020. Very, very excited to launch this book tonight. Fred is here, he's zooming in from the States, which is super exciting. And we are also joined by Blake Morrison, who you will definitely be aware of. He is a celebrated writer of poetry, plays, fiction, criticism, and memoir. He's a professor of creative and life writing at Goldsmiths, so it's really good to have him here this evening. He's going to be in conversation with Fred later on in the event. So that you're aware of what's going to happen, we'll all be together for about an hour this evening. Fred's going to read from the book. He's just going to read a short excerpt. While he's reading, I'm going to put the text on screen for you so that you can read along. Just so that you know you're in control of your own screen. You should be able to zoom in or out and reconfigure it to suit your own needs. I can see you've all found the chat box. That's really cool. Keep saying hi to us. Do make sure that you click on everyone so that we can all see each other's messages and we can all be involved in the conversation. Later on in the event, while Blake and Fred are chatting, we want you to get involved in the conversation even more at that point. Obviously, we can't see you and you can't turn your cameras on. But as well as the chat box, there's another button which is called Q&A. Please find that. Please get some questions lined up for Fred. Blake will be able to put them to him later in the event. So get all those lined up for us later on. If you've got any technical questions, you can also pop those in the chat and we're here to help you throughout the event. Thank you for paying for being here. We really appreciate that. You will get an email tomorrow with the discount code for your book. So don't worry about doing any of that just yet. For now, I think we should jump into the launch. So I'm going to invite Blake on screen to join me and we'll begin.
Hi, I hope everybody can hear me. It's a great pleasure to be here, partly because I've known Fred for such a long time. Way back in the 70s, when I was in my 20s, this teenage boy joined my poetry workshop that I was running at Goldsmiths. We had some very good people in that workshop, Wendy Cope, Alan Jenkins, but we also had a star called Fred Dagar. This was before he went to university. He was barely out of school. Perhaps he was still out of school. And within a few years, he was having his first collection published by Chatto, who were indeed my publisher at the time, Mama Dot, followed up by Airy Hall. He's gone on to publish more collections of poetry. He's also written 4 novels. He's written plays. One of his novels about the Jonestown massacre, particularly powerful novel, I think. But now, always innovative, Fred has come up with a very different kind of book, a work of, you could even call it confessional nonfiction, creative nonfiction, memoir, partly a journal, I suppose, and as the title suggests, to do with the plague year, 2020, when COVID affected us all. But there was a more particular illness that Fred was contending with. Actually, we begin his book slightly earlier in October 2019. But I don't want to do any more spoilers. It's for Fred to tell you about his book, and he's going to begin reading from it now. Fred.
Thank you. Okay, hello, good evening. Thank you so much, Blake. And thank you everyone for joining. I'm going to read from chapter 6. So my thanks to everyone at Carcanet, Michael, the 2 Andrews, Becky, Alan, Jasmine. Thanks for all your work at the poetry books and for publishing my first nonfiction book. Thank you, Blake, for agreeing to help me with my launch. It made sense to have you with me at this time. And we met in, I think, 79, late 78 at your writing workshop at Goldsmiths. I dedicate this reading to the memory of the wonderful poet, Jean Breeze, who died on the 4th of August. To fall, falling, and never land, Today, I catch the spread of light across the east, paving the way for a ripe sun to climb this ladder of clear blue. Though it is out there and far, far away, the second far doubles the distance and stretches the heart's elastic inclusiveness to the max, I manage to draw it into my body through my eyes, ears, mouth, nose, and the pores of my skin until that sun rises in me. The day starts in me, and it is a good day. I incline my ear to the body for the slightest ping of any symptoms to do with the cancer. And I hear nothing, feel nothing, and think only of this sunrise extension of me, this shining thing. How to hold that feeling for the rest of my days. Yes, in part, the Pope's eternal sunshine of the spotless mind is a condition for conscious life from now to when I am laid low by time, not, I hope, by cancer. Not as forgetting to start over fresh, as if anyone can wipe the slate of memory clean, more as a pivot between the two as a way forward, inviting selective forgetting for the hopeful sun to germinate at space and repair whatever damage lingers in that spot. With cancer as my focal point, as the damage in me that needs to be repaired, with repair as an endless process of flux, each new stimulus drawn from my sense of history and from autobiography. My disease depends on fixity. Cancer wants me to sit and be still and let it run rampant in me. Imagine me reclined. See the cancer pick up speed in exact proportion to my passivity. The more elastic, the more static I become, the more momentum cancer gains. This is not stillness as contemplation. This is inert and passive surrender that operates on physical and mental planes. In a conversation between Derek Walcott and Seamus Heaney at a writers' conference in 2012, Derek made the case for the writer who needs solitude, stillness, and quiet to help bring about a readiness in the poet for poems to arrive or emerge. He called for a stillness and quietude of the mind as much as the body and its surroundings. As Derek made his case, I saw Seamus lean forward a little. The moment Derek ended his convincing argument for this ideal environment that brings about poetry, that constructs an ideal place and opens up a coveted space for the reception of poetry, Heaney lifted a hand with a pointed index finger and blurted out, but we dwell in clamor. Of course, both conditions obtain for poetry. The clamor of the world that is outside and inside needs to be quelled sometimes for poetry to breathe and be, and cannot be evaded as much as brought on board by poetry. We need both and. The and part of the equation is that which cannot be described adequately, which the mind and heart sense intuitively as present alongside clamor and contemplative stillness, and suggests something unending that is always being made and remade, something that can be grasped partially, and so the poet must try for it. Such a stance is not conclusive. It invites perpetual rehearsal, Wilson Harris's term, the unfinished business of poetry, poetry's endless flux, the tilt of the poet as a permanent reach and gesture, slightly off balance always, and always that necessary feel of being about to fall in order to recover, only to feel that tilt once more. To fall, falling, and never land. Fly with no end to that flight. No windmill of arms, no flare of legs. A crawl, as if to take on board the velocity of flight. Hip dip, shoulder duck, head bop and weave, foot stump, as hands carve the air. Move yourself. Hear this dub beat out of 1970-something. Dark room, ganja smoke-filled vibes stacked with boxes, bass boxes from floor to ceiling. Mr. Operator, please do not stop the rhythm, but unless you want a riot from the crowd, strapped to that sound and linked to the ground. Can you hit the next page for me? Thank you. The 45 with the donut hole and turntable. Spin it. Inhale. How long did it take to get to this place? Our generation wanted more, always more, which amounted to nothing, wanting nothing to do with a system that wanted nothing from them except their black sweat and blood. Rock on, against racism, against sexism, against homophobia, against poverty, police brutality, the prison system, nuclear weapons, and any other schism that happened to rear its mean little institutionalized head. Echo chamber of the sound system mimics the pump of blood around the walls of the heart, where blood picks up speed for its current around the body. Blood beat. Linton Kesey Johnson, LKJ, step forward. Dub, bass, and rhythm, guitar twang. Measure this salt and pepper tongue lashing of the system. Skin drawn over the drum of a skeleton that moves to the beat. Is there a cure in this? How can there not be some salve for the soul in this monument of skin peppered with a history of the transatlantic slave trade, so that the bow in the sea and sway of the ship gel with the rhythm of the pulse? Atlantic in my blood, even if I did not bathe in salt water. King Tubby, Tapazuki, and LKJ's scatamata. Help me with this mantra for my cure of my cancer that may or may not be the best cure for my disease. If what I have may find a path through me to end both of us. Turn left and you bump into my writing hand. Turn right and you meet my echo above my head and underfoot. Hum, breath, fill those pockets under my arms. Lift me off my feet. I hum in breath and tongue to drive back the thing in me that is a part of me, only insofar as I let it become me. No amount of wise words will suffice for this journey. What is the technique behind the niche that I must take to another level? It is the beat, drum, bass, reverberation, delay. Stir a bit of rhythm in the pot, pepper it. Echo, move with the operator, that mixology for a palette strung by air and heart, birth of the B-side generation, version excursion, show me my cure. I am ready or not, as the case may be for me. Studio bells toll, not for me, for my disease. Herald its end in me, not my ending, thanks to it. What is my thumbprint if I hold this raw ragamuffin pulse to my ear? I was there back then in the mid to late 70s and the militant 80s in London, and I carried a snow water of all of it in the breadbasket of my brainstem. I hop on the bus heading for a destination not on any map. How time flies without my clocking it. What is that, Marx? Brothers, maxim. Time flies like an arrow, fruit flies like a banana. Before I know where I am or who, for that matter, I catch sight of gray hair on my head as I brush past the hallway mirror, gray that sprouted seemingly overnight. Digital dub takes the baton from reels of tape, composed in my youth by that sound. In my twilight years, I decompose to it. How did Derek Walcott phrase it in his Calypso riff, Spoilers Return? Tell desperados when you reach the hill, I decompose, but I composing still. Or so I thought, until the arrival on my radar of this disease. Sit me between walls of speakers and allow the bass to drive disease from me. See how my clothes tremble? That is the work of air displaced by the speakers that shimmers the flesh beneath my cotton socks. Bass, shake my fillings, still the tremor in my hands and the twitch of my feet. My world, inundated by a vast wash of morning light, stirs, so that a steady wave begins in the east from an open sky. Last night's aperture birthing a sun. Stand up in this vaulted sky and mind you not bump your head on the ceiling. That recedes to hands that pull, draw in, and gather the wide span and haul of a net cast by a strong arm to catch us all in it. We are a silver catch that net releases onto a beach where we jump and flick light off our scales. We are afloat as dust in a sunbeam that falls slant across the room. By we, I mean my disease and my engagement with it. In that lime green flock of parakeets swerving over the skinny palms of mid-city LA, they pull a veritable market of noise in their wake. I convert the currency of my recognition of my cancer from negative to positive, from a thing that worries me to something noteworthy and in need of a solution. I address the disease and it addresses me. I call and it responds, or I respond to its call in me. If the disease is my enemy, it is my friend too. If it wishes to destroy me, it seeks to help me to live a better life. My cancer reminds me of that stained glass panel in Durham Cathedral that says troubled, but not distressed. While troubled by my cancer, provoked by its machinations in my body, I refuse to be distressed by it, become its victim. The cathedral is my body. I invited cancer into it. The disease worships as it sees fit. I conduct a ceremony to quell and steer that behavior toward terms that preserve rather than destroy the cathedral. It scares me that we share the same space. As sun and the moon share sky, so my cancer shares my body with me. It is not a question of proportion. There is no balance to be struck with cancer, no bargaining with this devil. Any amount of cancer is too much for my body. My conversation with my cancer is to persuade it to desert the space that it occupies, since it has compromised the entire organism. There is no switch of roles in which each may take a turn to lead and follow. The novel coronavirus shutters the city. Civic and work life grind to a standstill. Traffic becomes sparse, and the shelves of the supermarkets empty like a shebeen raided by police. Birdsong replaces the usual traffic hum of the city. Light falls unimpeded by what the city sends up into the atmosphere, so that the air itself feels lighter, though I may be giddy from the exigencies of the emergency. This adds a new clause to the things I have to worry about. My doctor's office is not handling calls, and my emails to him remain unanswered. I see this halt in the affairs of state as a reflection of the disease being granted carte blanche. While the disease earns a green light for its progress in me, I receive a red one in my quest for a cure. Cancer gallops around my body while I sit on my hands and wait for help to deal with it. I am among the compromised bodies in a stricken city that cannot afford to host another malady. The last straw may be my despair. My propensity to ruminate on my last days is full of pain and an early end to my life. It saps my energy. I move about the house like a sloth. I don't want to wash and shave. Despair, that proves to be an art form, for some people, vandalizes my imagination. I cannot write, cannot think outside cancer and its bad outcomes. Despair takes over my life. I prefer a pinch of the bleak for this house of my body rather than painting my house black from pillar to post and closing the blackout curtains. I want to spin bleakness out of its concentric vortex and into the widening ripples of light, of hope and purpose for consciousness. Spin it into the light of my childhood in Erie Hall, a village about 40 miles outside Guyana's capital, Georgetown. Back then and in that place, we skipped stones to see who could make the most skips before the stone sank out of sight. We loaded the smoothest, flattest stone we could sort that lay near the lake and gripped it near the edge of our palm close to thumb, index, and middle fingers, and tensed our shoulder and leaned low and fired that stone at the flat face of water. Those skips happened fast, and you had to focus to get the correct count. We whooped and flicked our index fingers against our pressed middle finger and thumb. We slapped our thighs or high-fived with the champion stone flicker, searching for more flat stones, and tried another round to beat that high score. As the stone skipped, ripples sprang up and widened and grew less and less on the surface of the lake until they sank back into the water. The lake absorbed our energies. Those stones stopped skipping on the surface and dived out of sight to the bottom of the lake and added to the lake bed whatever life was taken from the lake shore. If we thought back then that the stones would just as well pile up on the bottom of the lake as languish on the shore, that our skipping of them meant nothing but an interruption of such kept and adhered to positions, we might have missed out on a laugh and the exhilaration of a shared phenomenon. The best stones sorted from the pile, the close study as that stone's life blazed a trail across the lake, and the moment when it vanished from us after opening this unbridgeable gap of skips between it and us, the warmth in our activated shoulders radiated to our animated spirits. Our eyes met in confirmation of this life, and as we tried once more to outdo our last best effort, things start to go wrong when around mid-March I can't seem to put a foot right. I become jittery, infused with the tremors of the drug's side effects. Not fear, just feeling off thanks to my biorhythms or horoscope or some juju of pins stuck in my effigy by my enemy, make that plural, enemies, on 3 continents, if my paranoia serves me justly, and if I fall in with this run of things going wrong, or slightly off kilter in a tilt of the field of sorts for me, so that my aim and gestures miss their target by a centimeter, and so I may as well have not taken aim in the first place, which leads to mounting bad feeling in me and short temper in my dealings with others in the house who seem to move in slow motion and do not hear me when I speak. And if they hear, they misunderstand. And that just adds to my frustration with them and my feeling that I am disconnected from everyone all the time and in need of more than language to help me correct my course, which has veered too far off the path for me to even think that I can resume the journey or take it up where I left off, as if my life is a lost and found of aspects of my fortune waiting for me to collect them, parked as they are in some legitimate space or place, or just an eventuality as this one, of me waking on the wrong side of the bed or getting out of it and leaving the best of me asleep. And so my day starts without me in it, and I move out of sync with everything around me, and all that grows in me is this frustration that I cannot diffuse or reduce or escape. This is where a cuss or two might be cathartic for me and reset my day and recalibrate my discord. I think this surge of bad feeling feeds my cancer, adds to its delight in me. The more I act out of anger or frustration, the more of that ill persona I assume. Whoever I might be is sidelined. I can feel the bunched muscles in my shoulders at the base of my neck, both sides aching now, and knotted, pulling my shoulders up around my ears and hunching my back. I lean into my misconception of everything and increase the likelihood of more mishaps coming my way by my obvious show that I am primed to receive such negative messages. I want to take on Caliban's aspect of using language for one thing alone, though with a gift for more than cursing, as his dream speech proves. With Caliban's crude tongue, given its vituperative might, I too can cast spells the way he spits insults in a stream of frog spawn akin to a witch's brew. I reserve his poetry for another occasion, for now I launch his tongue to drive back the bile of the air, the furniture and people as they all conspire to add to my knotted shoulders and hunched back, all such poisons internalized by me and made so private that they aren't even dependent on the external factors of air, people and furniture, clipping my knees as I sweep past. To set them off in me, they just need me. I conjure the Caliban of my imagination rather than the creature from Shakespeare's Tempest, a Caliban of the mind, part invention, part resurrection, to drive back the bogies of my mind, a creature modeled in part after M. Césaire's rendition of the colonized being. Césaire's image is of a beast of nature vested in ecology. His monstrous persona operates as a necessary corrective to our mechanized ways. So I greet it rather than shun it or act as if I'm afraid. I say, come here, wild thing, come to me. I need you on my side to feel I am doing my best to resist cancer. An untainted beast like you inside me registers my condition of rugged resistance. Where are you now, ghouls? I'm close to being prepared to engage in combat with you. Kansas troops. You flew in the air around my head and climbed in my spinal column. If I live long enough, you will lose interest in me, or you'll all be dead. If I do not grant you ruin my heart and head, you might wither away, like the capitalist state as decreed by Marx. Carl, how long must I wait? I am not the patient, able to remain focused and grow a beard as I wait for an outcome that I know must arrive at some point. All I have to do is wait and learn how to practice waiting as a craft and an art, that place where the sensibility is stationed for a long time and is vigilant, to wait with interest, with waiting as an activity in itself. Hot flash again, unheralded, unwelcomed, and out of my control. I cringe as it opens my pores and holds this flamethrower close to my skin. I grit my teeth and wait. This too will pass. There is no pattern to how it claims my body, just a claim launched at irregular intervals with no algorithm except the fact that it recurs and wakes me when it happens at least 3 times in the night and hourly in the day. As my cancer proliferates and sends me yet another iteration of itself as a mean ghost and shapeshifter, I summon the creatures of my culture and education. In addition to Caliban, I call in the being who birthed him, his mother, Sycorax, her spells bring that coveted nothingness waiting for us at death, that no place where we send our thoughts when those thoughts grow tired of their ties to history and biography. We send them in spells of our own, songs we identify with, and dances we see our bodies performing, even if we have two left feet. It's a place not found on any map, where poetry pools its moments from history and myth and politics and sex and gender, where each spirit bides its time having walked away from the skin and parted company with the sex of history and politics, to dance and parade in this communal and no gravity carnival space of nothingness, of being disembodied, a spiritual reliquary.
Thank you, Fred. I know that you said you wanted to get the reading out of the way first because you found it very emotional to be taken back to that time in 2020. After all, where you first got that diagnosis of prostate cancer, I think grade 4, you were not yet 60. You had a 13-year-old daughter. You don't smoke, you don't drink a lot, you had no reason to think this thing was there, and then suddenly you're facing mortality and doing so also at a time when quite soon, when as the investigations proceed, you're doing so at the time of COVID. And so there's a great anxiety as to whether actually you can get the treatment, so much having shut down in the way of hospital treatment. So it's a very powerful book. I know you probably didn't mean to create narrative suspense. Will I survive? But I mean, the reader gets to the end thinking, thank God, Fred's still with us. Thank God, Fred, you're still with us. It's a happy outcome. But it was a terrible time for you.
Yeah, thanks, Blake. It was a terrible time. Yeah, I got to the, yes, there was so much going on in the year. It's a lot of literature helped, and some of the pandemic helped, and it coincided too with George Floyd's death and the social unrest. That took me out of my preoccupation with with what was going on with me, and
it seems to tie in, doesn't it? And I mean, obviously, you're a black man who's ill. You know that a lot of black men, a disproportionate number, are dying of COVID, and you can't help but be conscious of race as being involved with this illness.
right.
If in the end you think, well, I'm a guy with cancer. Being a black guy with cancer doesn't necessarily mean same.
I spent some time in the book saying, about asking about blackness and about cancer, trying to separate it from the fact that it was hitting me and I had to cope with it, and then trying to connect it to the larger society and the waves and currents in which I'm swept up in the moment of, now. And so that connection between me and then the us of the community was always a conversation, because the healthcare system here is so monetized. Everything is, you got to give $1 to pass each turnstile to get treatment. And I was grateful to be in the university system and with a hospital where, in a way, my blackness was diminished. I wasn't the usual Black person, and class became significant and so on. So I was grateful for some of the things that I dodged. And then I got mad and angry because George Floyd was killed in a way that reminded me that, it could happen to anybody, and look what the system is continuously doing. I then saw the police and what they were doing as a part of the cancer, part of the problem of bodies in society. I saw cancer as, morphing into all these other nasty currents, racism being one of them. And that maybe a part of my reaction was that I'd internalized some of those negative currents to become ill. So I then made cancer into this bogey that was connected to society. So it wasn't just me. And some literature helped. I mean, Susan Sontag wrote a book called illness as metaphor, where and I said, my illness is not a metaphor. I was arguing against her book all the time, but I appreciated the fact that she took away the individual I from her piece and was trying to characterize a disease in terms of these larger patterns that she was locked in as a woman, but not as an individual. She tried to lessen that quite a bit. So I was arguing with her when I read her. Audre Lorde's cancer journals really helped, because she then politicizes her Blackness and her feminism and lesbianism. And those become enabling, helpful things as a group assistance over and above the disease, foraging through her body. And she continues in her journal, engaging with conversations. And I realized, a wellness wasn't just what happens at the end. A wellness is actually a daily process with the disease. So her journal was fantastically helpful.
Of course, you have conversations with the cancer. I don't know whether you remember when Dennis Potter had cancer. He referred to his cancer as Rupert, called his cancer Rupert after Murdoch, great enemy of Dennis Potter. And cancer is mostly your enemy, but I think even in that passage you read, you allude to cancer as a friend, that cancer has some potential to help you, and maybe you should talk a bit about that, whether it means it helped you to prioritize, to know what your priorities were, that it made you grateful for what you had. But it's doing this terrible thing to you and putting you through this terrible stuff. And you do hate it and you do curse it, but there's another part of you that's calling it a friend.
Yeah, I talked about it in terms of a tango sometimes, that it was a dance partner who was roughing me up a little bit, but there was some harmony to the dance. I saw it as knowledgeable, not a thing to run from, but if were I to embrace it, I would learn from it and benefit in some way that I wasn't sure how. I knew that everything I could do, I've been doing in poetry and fiction and teaching and reading and so on, would have to be brought to bear in making sense of it. So I knew that whatever I wrote had to cut across the various art forms and be expressionistic and impressionistic and expressive if I was going to tackle this shape-shifting thing. So yes, it was a dance, not a wrestling match, and a cuddle, and not a binary war of clashing heads. That's a simple way of talking about it. I never saw cancer as that simple, that you could just go in surgically and remove it and then carry on with business as usual. For me, it had to be something that was organic. And then I had to make sense of it using everything at my disposal. And yeah.
There's a question here, a good question, I think, from Nancy Ann Miller, who, as well as praising the book, says, do you feel that the plight of cancer served to open you up to a depth in your writing not reached before? I asked this from a place of wonder by what your imagination, wit, and intelligence accessed. Maybe also in answering that, you might talk a little bit about the process, because in the extract you read, you talked about can't do anything, can't write. This is a 300-page book, right? You clearly, whether did it begin as a journal, and as Nancy's asks, do you feel it's deepened your writing in some ways, this experience?
Poetry has always been about doubt and about how dare you begin again. So there was always a depth. I was never a narrative person, so I do narratives, but I was never a narrative person. So there was always a sense of a depth charge in the writing, a sense of going down and deepening your understanding. So cancer was another challenge. It was a new territory. I hadn't been there before. And it was new, but I felt that the processes that I was involved with were the same, of contemplation, of dealing with rage, of consideration, of return to a site that's exhausted to see what else is there, of another blank page, another sense of why start again? How dare you? I dare. So there was always those patterns were there. So yes, it was new, but I don't feel that cancer is a university for me as a writer. The university of it was that I was able to connect it to the social unrest and the protests that were going on in LA and the pandemic, and see the society as cancified as well, as suffering from malaise, and that some of its institutions had cancer in the way they operated. And so those connections I'd not made before in my poetry or fiction. So that was new and that was deep. But the process of consideration, contemplation, which is why I told the story about dwelling in clamor that Seamus Heaney responded to it with Derek Walcott, and the idea of stillness and contemplation, because both have to be, I said both and, because I was really talking about how I am approaching this very thing I'm doing right now. I use a story to illustrate the procedure of the writing. And so in the middle of the clamor of the pandemic and the protests, which I had to pay attention to, there would be this quest for stillness and some kind of knowledge and some kind of thought. And I think the one thing that was fresh too was going to my autobiography, the idea of fiction as, autofiction, the idea that I would use my past and friends and people I knew and so on to think about what it was that kept me well. I hadn't seen my past as a series of stepping stones, solid references that would help me to move through a difficult period now. Whenever I look back, it was there's a Sankofa style, that Ghanaian bird that has an egg on its back. It looks back in order to go forward. And the instruction is if you look after the past, you can move forward. I'd done that with history, but never thought my biography would actually help me in my present malady. And I think that lesson was a direct result of the cancer. So that's a deep consideration for me and a lesson that I didn't expect.
You were, Elaine Savory is asking, did you draft a lot? Did it come quickly? I was assuming that you were keeping a kind of journal. It is a journal of a plague year. It's not, the book doesn't read like a journal, but presumably you were writing things down as you were going through them. I mean, some of the detail about the medical treatment and your own research is a stupendous amount of detail there.
Yes, there were journaling aspects to it. You're totally right, Blake. I did, Elaine. Thank you for your question too. When I took a drug, you better pay attention when someone tells you drop your pants and here's a 3-month injection to keep you going. I mean, the needle's big. The contents of the needle is huge, and you're thinking, whoa, what will that do? And so there was a focus with the details of hospital visits. And then when I had a drug that was called, Lupron Depot and had 2 or 3 other names, I went down the rabbit hole of finding out, well, exactly how does it work? What kind of a block is it blocking, and how is testosterone stopped, and why is estrogen promoted, and so on. So I did have to do some research. I discarded all of it, of course. You read tons, you take some notes, and you make sure people know that you thought about it, but you don't want the research to kill the piece. So I did temper it a little bit. But yes, I wrote those moments down. I tried to write conversations down after I hung the phone up or after I met someone, spoke to a nurse. So those are the journal parts. The parts about Guyana, Airy Hall, were things I've thought about before. For example, I'd written a poem about kites called Mama Warns Against an Easter Rising. And that was such an instructive event when I grew up in Airy Hall. And my brother is Greg, who's 11 months older than me, always tells me, no, it wasn't exactly like that. It was this. But we kind of go through it together. And I knew from writing about that, I retold the story as a prose section in the book. So when I wrote that wasn't the journaling at all. That was me going to that past and just, saying, okay, this is something that's a touchstone that helps me to keep things clear. When I said another moment in the book when I talked about my English teacher from my secondary school, Jeff Hardy, and we had later on in life, we'd go to a pub and there's an incident in there that I recalled that actually happened like that, but it's always remained a funny thing for laughing. It was fearful at the time, but in retrospect, it was something we could laugh at, because we saw that he was a gay man, I was a black man, and we both carried these two things that were to be negotiated in the city, in London, in South London. So I laughed about it now, and because I was able to laugh about it, it made me think about that past. So there are moments like that were touchstones I could go back to from my biography that didn't require journaling, and I dropped those into the book. So the book is a mixture of that.
Another thing that it's a mixture of, I suppose, is the private and the public. I mean, it's interesting that you did not tell anybody. You did not tell even your closest friend. You didn't tell your mum. You didn't want to worry her. You kept this cancer very much to yourself and your family. And yet you've written this book, which is very intimate, which is out there in the world, where you talk openly about procedures, intimate parts of your body, the worry that you have for a time because of the treatment you're having, that you're going to grow breasts, and so on. So it's interesting that, you don't feel it's deepened you necessarily, but maybe it's opened certain things up that you wouldn't normally talk about. Do you think that's
Yes,
okay?
yeah, no, that's absolutely right. The notes I took, I thought I couldn't do a half thing. I mean, I couldn't tell people because I was in shock for a long time. I was speechless for a long time. And then I felt I had to save a lot of my energy to deal with what I was dealing with that was coming up very fast. And to start to talk to people, you become a patient, or they might worry. I was worried about them worrying about me, and I didn't have the energy for that, and I wasn't ready for that. I eventually got ready and told people when I was, I thought, okay, now I can tell people because I've jumped over so many of the hurdles, and there's, only eight more to go, or whatever the race is. So that was to do with my inability to speak about something that I was surprised by, and that had me on the ropes. The other part of it, in telling it truthfully, or as it is, with no decoration, I just thought, if I'm going to write something, having not spoken about it because I couldn't find the energy, once I got the energy, I'd better talk about it as it happened. I couldn't dress it up, actually. And some of it is private and no longer private, but is there to do with what actually happens when you get treated, when the system grabs hold of you and treats you, and the drugs have side effects. So I felt I had to be true to what was happening to me. And I tried to avoid toilet humor as much as possible, but it was very hard. The worry about breasts, when my chest began to get tender and so on, which they did, there was another drug to go against estrogen, because the drug that blocked testosterone promoted estrogen. And so they had to give me a block for that one. And so I had to, there was all these drugs. At one point I had to make sure I had them all parceled out properly. But what I knew when it was happening that I would be cured of it, but I was still afraid that Hera was teaching it. And I was also interested in the fact that I had been talking to students about gender, and we were reading books, The Argonauts by Maggie Nelson and so forth. We'd read books that were doing this thing about gender being slippery, and you go on, you can decide on your own and pick and choose, and it's a menu. And here I was, not thinking I'd be challenged personally by it. And when I was thinking, wait a minute, what do I really think about breasts? And so I had to kind of try to talk about the fact of teaching and talking about something, and then making it a part of your understanding as a part of your life procedure, and the difference of that. So I wanted to register the two, the shock and the adjustment. And I think once that was happening, I could talk about that. But then I discovered from all the things online, a lot of men have that symptom, and a lot of men worry about it. There's so much about cancer. It's an industry. and so on of talks. So once I saw that a lot of people were worrying about it in the various chat places, I thought, well, I could talk about it, and if it's, but not try and keep humor, because I felt I would come through the other side, because I knew the drugs were there to help me.
Well, I think, and it's one of the reasons the book's so powerful is that you are honest and direct about these things, and even people who haven't been through the kind of treatment that you had and the kind of worries you had are going to connect with this. You mentioned how you, and indeed the extract showed it, you go back to childhood at times, and you also think about, don't you, your father, who you never really knew, and of course all the implications of that. He died young. You're not entirely sure whether the story you were told about how he died is true. You wonder whether there's a genetic thing going on. And so sort of journeying back in time, childhood, and thinking about him and so on, that all seems a natural part of the process, what you were thinking about, what you were worrying about at the time.
Yeah, yes, biography became really important, and also what you pass on. I mean, I was thinking, if I've got a cancer gene in my body, I was thinking about kids, my kids. I spoke to Matthew about it, Cameron, Elliot. I spoke to them and said, look, I don't think it's genetic, but it might be. But get checked up. As soon as you need to get checked up, just do it. Don't wait for age 40 or whatever, just in case. So I had to think about genetics, because I wanted my kids to know, once I spoke to them about it, that it might be an element. And I also wanted to think about someone I didn't know who might leave me a gift. I didn't know my dad at all. And so the idea that he would leave a time bomb for me to inherit was just an odd thing, because I had to look at it without rancor if I was going to move on. So it was a good challenge to think about hereditary, and then maybe history too. The history of the pain of history is that I suppose you attach a biographical element to it. It isn't just the Atlantic slave trade; it's my relatives. So you feel that trauma, and so suddenly it came to this idea that directly behind me was this father figure who was absent, but who had left me something that I didn't want or care for. And that was something I had to think about. I had to then get warm with that memory. And how do I warm it if it's frozen? How do I cuddle it if it's a bee? A wasp, sorry, bees are fine, a wasp.
Among other things that you weave into the book is, if you like, folklore, and you talk a lot about Anansi, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, the spider and Brer Rabbit. Do you want to tell us a bit about that and how that found its way into your thinking at the time?
Yeah, I got there's a book by Lewis Hyde, which Jeff gave to me about 10 years ago, called Trickster Makes This World. And he explains the basis of trickery and shape-shifting to the formation of our understanding of our past and our culture. And I realized in Guyana, we had so many Anansi stories and Brer Rabbit stories, a trickster figure, Anansi, spider who would become a person and perform all kinds of tricks. And those fables and so on were helping to shape us and to make us think about our heritage. I knew it linked back to West Africa, Anansi stories, and Brer Rabbit. So I was interested in what that heritage is, if it comes to you as a story or a myth. And if I'm thinking about my past, where do I go to find sustenance? When I felt those stories that kept me as a child engaged and sustained me as a child must be things that I could go to in my adult need. So it was a way of bringing myth and fable into it, not just as oblique things, but as real sustaining forces and story. And because we had them in Guyana when I was growing up, and from reading Lewis Hyde's book. I saw that he had formalized the process of thinking about it. Wilson Harris too, thinks very much about the pre-Columbian basis to the Caribbean culture, which he sees as vital. And so I thought, well, let me go back to myth and get before history and bring that into the body. The body wasn't just this fragile thing with its nervous system. It had these memories that were kind of archetypal, that logged into patterns that were enduring patterns and sustaining patterns, which I felt I needed to get through as a reader and writer in trouble.
We've got a few more minutes, so please, anybody who'd like to put questions, do so. I want to go back to something you said earlier about doubt, and how you talk about this in the book, how doubt has sustained you as a poet. But of course, the kind of doubt that you were in during this period was negative kind of doubt, I'd have thought. I mean, for instance, the great worry as to whether you would have a really important operation which had been arranged for April, whether it would come off. The consultant surgeon couldn't guarantee it would happen because of COVID and everything that was going on. And one of the things that the book, I think, is about is how this thing is happening to your body, but your mind is absolutely consumed. There's nothing else but the cancer. Yeah, of course, other things play in. Literature plays in, poetry plays in, and the world out there, as you say, Black Lives Matter, George Floyd, and everything plays in. But at the center, always, every day you wake up, cancer and the worry and the doubt. So I'm just wondering whether, doubt is always a positive thing, whether there wasn't actually the doubt as to whether you ever get treated, with the doubt whether you'd survive, was also a terrible thing.
Yes, I confess. Yes, there were tears on those days when doubt was not a literary genre, or a style, when it literally was, if this doesn't happen and I have to wait past a pandemic, I may not be around. Where can I go for an operation? What can I take? The doubt was literally, I saw doubt. I mentioned Bleak House in the extract I read. I separated the two, but thinking of Dickens and, spontaneous combustion. But I was thinking of this idea of something that it is akin to doubt, but it's a gloomy despair. The idea of the blinds and the house that's entirely darkened, which I wasn't allowing to happen to me. So I think there was this thing of whenever I faced exactly what you described, which is the reality of being a roadblock of where can you go now? You're in a problem and it's a cul-de-sac. I was always determined to find a way out. And usually that way was to do with writing and the slippages and the shape-shifting of writing and invention. So I think that's partly why I didn't, I said doubt was actually my practice, bring it on. But it was bravura a little bit, because cancer was saying, you think you know doubt? Try this for size. And I was saying, oh God, no, and so I did come up against I did come up against things that were unadorned, unilaterally awful, and couldn't be, turned into slippage and something else. But I still nevertheless spun it. I still insisted not to make it metaphor, but to make it something else. This is why the shape-shifting and trickster thing element became so important to me, because just when I could not do anything with the reality of a disease, that had to be an operation. And then, of course, later on, this beyond the book, but the book ends, if you haven't read it, and this is not a spoiler, I say about the blood test that will come in 3 months' time to see if the cancer is gone. And I ended the book with the test that will happen, and then have my father, his biography, help me to bridge that waiting period by ending the book. And I think that's a time when, that's a moment when I wasn't sure if the operation was fine. The doctors thought, yeah, we've got everything. We cleared a path around it. We took out all, if we could, you're fine, you should be. And then I had to wait for this blood test to confirm that it would be the case. and it's a question mark. It's not a spoiler to say that I had the blood test and it came back, and I had to then have 40 sessions of radiation. So the book ends before the real darkness and the threat begins, actually, because the operation was one clear moment. I was waiting for that and the drugs and so on, but I never anticipated I would face a bout of radiation after that. And that was when I had to think, well, is art really helpful? Who can help me now? Where do I go? And I had to then call on people and talk to people and talk to everyone, you know, and most of the people are logged on here. Jackie is there. Jeff.
Yeah, now Jackie, it's great to hear. Jackie K has got a question here. Hi, Jackie. Thanks for this. Thank you, she says, for an amazing reading and candid conversation. I find it amazing how much you have learnt during this whole hard time. Do you feel that memoir is more exposing than poetry, or does it feel it a relief to have written a year of plagues?
Well, after Red Dust Road, you know, it's a good thing. You know, I think you're right. The question, in a way, you're right. There is you've got to go for something slightly raw. At least so I feel. In writing nonfiction about yourself and about probably, you know, you can use humor and everything else to help you along the way, but you have to go to a place that's of discomfort and something you're not quite sure about or don't quite know. I mean, I remember when I read Blake, you know, when did he last see your father? There was so much in it where you talk. There was one pop heart in there, and then there is in Red Dust Road too, when Jackie meets her dad, which became very funny, but it was also alarming to read. But you bring it across in a very funny way. The same thing with when your dad is ill, Blake. You talk about moving him, and you think he says something about his body and about it was kind of right directly about that the balls get trapped. That section where he's moved, and it's such a personal, private declaration that I almost wanted to look away from the text. You know, it was that kind of.
Yeah, and I think people may have that reaction to yours. They will also be unable to, you know, put it down. But you know, it's the daring that you have to talk about, yeah, you know, some very difficult stuff. But there is humor as well. It's not though it's a journal of a plague year. It's you find some positives in there. And, you know, if I suppose in talking to cancer as a friend, not an enemy, it's because you learned some stuff.
Yeah.
Would that be fair to say?
Very fair. I thank you. Yes.
I think we are coming to an end. I've been told we have to end very promptly at 8. I don't see any more questions, so I'm going to suggest that we end it there. All I can say is to everybody, if you haven't read the book, do read it. And thanks, Fred, for writing it and for reading from it today and for talking about it so interestingly. And see you again soon. You'll come over from LA, won't you? You'll come over to the UK.
Yes, I will.
And see us all again soon, I hope.
Yes, definitely. Thank you so much, Blake. I appreciate it. Great conversation.
Great to have you here. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you guys so much. It was such a great event. Thank you guys all for being here and celebrating with us, and your amazing messages in the chat. It was so good to have you involved. So thanks so much. What you must now do is go straight to the Carcanet website and buy your copy of the book. I've put the link in the chat. You'll get £2 off for paying to be here. So thank you. And the code is there for you. Also, don't worry about that now. There's an email coming directly to you tomorrow, and get in touch if you have any problems or you want to order many copies of the book to give to your friends. That is also very welcome. Send me an email. So congratulations, Fred, and thanks, Blake, for hosting this. It's been a real pleasure to have you both here tonight. So the last thing that I need to say is please join us again next week We are launching a collected poems by Miles Burrows, and he will be joined by Jane Liddell King. So that's all on the website for you to have a look at. I'll leave the chat open for a couple of minutes more so you can get your final messages in there, and I'll just leave it open for a couple of seconds. But really, that's everything from me and from us. So thanks again to you all, and congrats, Fred, and thank you, Blake.